Every cat owner needs to switch their cat's food once in a while. It might be because your cat has to go on a diet, or because you're switching it from kitten food to adult food, or maybe it's developed a medical condition that needs a switch. But in any case, you're going to switch their food. But changing their food is not as simple as it might seem. Your cat might simply refuse to eat the new food, or it might eat the new food very quickly and then get diarrhea or start vomiting. This topic is primarily for new cat owners, but some of us old hands might also benefit from this information because it's not as simple as simply switching the food slowly. Recently, I wanted to add a new food to my cat's diet because there wasn't that much of their food at the store. I don't know if you've noticed, but some of the food, pet food, has been particularly scarce in recent months, and I wanted to make sure that I had a little bit more flexibility in their diet. My name is Francisco, and on this channel I work with my three cats, Calypso, Skyfall, and Mr. Muffin, to help you improve the lives of your indoor cats. Now, if you do the switch too quickly, it can lead to complications in your cat's digestion. Things like diarrhea, flatulence, and you'll notice that right away, smelly poops, or even possibly things like vomiting and constipation. First, I want you to be aware that these conditions can also be caused by other medical problems. But if you have just recently changed their food, that is most likely the cause of the problem. Now, every cat is different. Some of them will have a problem with making the transition, and some of them will have no problems at all. But your past experience in switching a cat's food is not necessarily indicative of what will happen with your current cat. But you could also have the opposite problem, which is you need to change their food. Let's say you want to change from dry to wet to improve their hydration, but your cat simply refuses to eat the new food. What do? To begin, let's make sure we're on the same page. What do I mean by changing their food? Do I mean changing their brand? Do I mean changing the main protein? Do I mean changing from dry to wet or from wet to raw? A change can be all of these things, and each of them has slightly different considerations. Different brands, for example, will use different fillers and different thickening agents, and your cat might react to those things even though the protein might not change. So it might be chicken this and chicken that, but the fillers and the thickening agents will be causing the distress. Or you might change the main protein within the same brand. You might go from a turkey to a fish, and that change in protein is what's going to cause your cat a problem. In general, when changing your cat's diet, here are some things to consider. First, consult your vet. There might be issues that you are not aware of which will influence how you go about this transition. Second, it's generally easier to make a transition if your cats have regular meal times, as opposed to a free grazing type of schedule. Third, unless there's a medical condition, take as much time as you need. There is no reason to rush it. If it takes a week, great, but if it takes a month or two, so what? And in some cases, you might not need to eliminate your old food at all. It just becomes part of another mix of foods. Fourth, it's more difficult to make the switch from dry to wet than vice versa. Wet has a very different texture and consistency, and they will have to get used to that before they get used to the smell and the taste of the food. In addition, they will have to get used to all the water in their new food. 5, consider that they might have an allergy or a sensitivity to the new food. Now, this is rare. It does not happen very often. But if you have done a slow transition and diarrhea persists, or there's any vomiting that is persistent, then that might be a consideration and you should consult with your vet. And lastly, consider that your cat might just have a particular taste. They might not like the flavor of one food and like the flavor of a different one. In that sense, they are just like people. You might not like onions or broccoli, and no matter how slowly you start eating them, you still don't like them. And cats might be the same way with a particular type of food. So let's talk about preventing digestion problems. Every animal has a mix of bacteria and microbes in their gut which help them to digest their food. And that mix of bacteria and microbes is used to a certain mix of nutrients. And if you switch those nutrients, if you change them too abruptly, your microbes cannot adjust. And so, boom, what do you have? You have possibly diarrhea or flatulence or smelly poops, that kind of problem. The quality of food also matters. The more additives there is in a particular food, the more possibility that they will react to one of those things. Switching from dry or wet to raw can also be difficult because it's simply more difficult to digest uncooked food. Now, your cat's system is created to digest raw, so it's natural for them. But that does not mean that the transition does not need to be managed carefully. Now, for many people, this problem with switching their food happens almost immediately when you bring a new cat home. It starts to get diarrhea or flatulence, and you wonder if your cat is sick or if it's super stressed. And then in addition to that, you might have to clean the diarrhea or help to give it a bath before it even trusts you.
Ow, 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 ow. Relax. It's okay.
It can be a big mess. Most likely the problem is that you switched their food too quickly from the food they were getting at the shelter or at the family that you adopted them from, and now they're not used to the food. So the easiest solution is preventive. Find out what they were eating before you adopt them and give them the same food, and then slowly make the switch to the food that you want to feed them. Now, what if you have the opposite problem? What if you need to make a transition in their food and they just simply won't eat it? This problem is very common with cats because they tend to be by nature rather skeptical and suspicious. This helps them to survive in the wild and avoid eating poisonous foods. In this way, they're very different than dogs, which will eat almost anything, even something they just threw up 2 minutes before. First and most important is do not try to starve your cat into eating a new food. Cats can get a very serious disease called hepatic lipidosis or fatty liver syndrome. And this happens when they don't eat for several days, usually 3 or 4 days, but it can be as fast as 24 hours. This disease can be fatal to your cat, and so it should be eating. And if it's not eating for any reason, whether you're switching your food or other problems, you need to take it to the vet. So if your cat is not eating its new food, you need to make the transition very slowly. Get it used to the smell and the texture first. You could try to have it lick a little bit of the new food off your fingers. Or you could try to give it as a treat before you actually give it to them as a meal. Just a little bit when they are looking for something special. If it's a particular texture problem, you might try getting them used to a wet texture by giving them actual baby food like Gerber baby food. Get them used to that wet texture with something that's very high quality before switching them to a wet cat food. And then in order not to waste food, instead of mixing it into their food, put a little bit on a side dish next to their regular food so that they can smell it. They can get used to smelling it next to their food when they are eating, just a little bit. And hopefully slowly they will start to sniff it, maybe start licking it, maybe start eating it. Once they start eating it, then begin the regularized transition. This is also when having regular meal times pays off, because a cat is used to eating at a certain time whatever it is that you put in front of them. This makes it a whole lot easier for them to make that transition. Free grazing will make it more difficult because if they just wander by their dish and their food is not in there, something else, they might just simply not eat it. They're more likely to wait until their regular food appears in their bowl. The most important things when switching food for a cat that is finicky is patience and persistence. It would be great if you could switch it in a week, but if it takes a month or 2 months or 3 months, so what? There's no big rush. Let them go through that transition, through that change at their own pace. Now, of course, if your cat has a medical problem or if their food is no longer available, you have a different type of issue. So I keep saying go through that transition slowly, but what do I mean on a practical basis? I like to change about 1/8 of their food every day. so that over a period of 8 days, their food is completely transitioned. Now, if you have a sensitive cat, then maybe you can double that and go through the transition in 16 days, 1/8 addition of the new food every 2 days. Almost every cat, unless they have serious digestive issues, will not have a problem with a 16-day transition. And it's the same thing if you're just adding a new food to the mix of the things that they eat. 1/8 until you reach the proportion that you want, whether it's a quarter or a half or whatever it is that you want to change. Now here's a special tip. Always have some of their regular food in reserve. Do not wait until you run out before going to the store. Because if for whatever reason the store is not supplied and you can't get their food, suddenly you have to make an abrupt transition, which can lead to the diarrhea and the flatulence and everything else. It'll save you a lot of heartache. I hope you found this video useful. Please like and subscribe. It'll help the channel, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.